G'day, welcome to Nature of Conservation. My name's Mark. Thanks for being here today. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role at environmental compliance and testing.
Yes, and thank you for having me again, Mark. I appreciate that. Yeah, my name is Mike Tooley. I'm a professional environmental engineer. I've got a business that's called Environmental Compliance and Testing. We've been around since 2011. Focused mainly on the local community, maybe a tri-state area, but mainly our two kind of missions are compliance and testing, as in the name. But I was going to break those down a little bit and kind of discuss those later, for sure, all the different services we have and compliance and testing and things that we can handle.
Oh, excellent. So how did the company get its start in Memphis?
Yes, it was basically the original company was E.F. Williams and Associates. When I went to Christian Mothers University, graduated in '93, started with E.F. Williams and Associates in '94. Same location actually on Brookhaven Circle. Went through there, it changed names a couple of times until 2011 where we took it over, my partner and I. And basically, yeah, I've been there ever since.
You said you've got two sides of the business, environmental testing and compliance. So
yeah.
First up, what is environmental testing?
Yeah, basically it's tests for all kinds of things, water, soil, air. I mainly test air primarily is the main source of testing for us, which comes in obviously a lot of different parameters we test for. I was going to go over a few of those if we have time.
Please do. How do you test the air?
Well, it's different for each analyte. So mold is my primary testing. Probably 70% of my jobs are mold related, where you're basically just doing an air or a swab or any combination of thereof. And the way the air testing works, we use what's called a biopump. It's basically it's a glorified little pump that we calibrate to a certain flow rate. You have a cassette that's tailored for mold spore collection. You set it in a room and you turn it on, let it run for 5 minutes. It draws in air, you turn it off, seal it up, send it to the microbiological lab, and then they basically break it open, put it under a magnifying glass or a high-powered microscope, I should say, and determine exactly how many spores are present and also all the different species. So a typical result might be, 5,000 spores per cubic meter in a room, and then it'll break down all, it's 10% cladosporium, 20% penicillium. It gives you basically, a fingerprint of what's going on in that room air-wise. And so what you're looking for is several things. You're looking for obviously the value. You don't want your spore counts to be really 500 or more is considered moderately elevated. You get over 1,000 plus, you're talking about significant elevation of spore counts. You want it to be in the low hundreds ideally. And what you do is you do an outdoor test in conjunction with the indoor samples. And you want your outdoor to be obviously higher in a non-air conditioned environment. You're going to expect that. So if you find values really high, higher than outside, that's certainly a red flag. You're also looking for the list of all the species. There are certain species which you've heard of toxic or black mold. Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, those are two of the most common in this region that I do find from time to time. For black mold to grow, it takes a lot of time. It's slow growing. So when you find it, you know that it's been a water situation that's been there for a while. And it's certainly something that you need more sensitivity towards because of the health concerns that it does create being there. But swab testing, like I said as well, we'll go in and take a swab test of anything that looks suspicious. And what that'll tell us is basically, number one, if it is mold. Number two, what kind of mold or molds. And then three, it gives us what's called a mycelial estimate, which basically means, if it's actively growing or not. So that's important too, if you have an active water source or not. If you have basically if a mycelial estimate is 0, that means it's old, it's been there for a while, it's probably dormant, meaning it's not going to do anything unless it gets reactivated again with moisture. So yeah, in most of these projects, I go in, do a look around, anything looks suspicious, I'll swab it, take random air samples as well, and based on the results, I can formulate my opinion, on what's going on. It's usually pretty clear. There's rarely any gray area in mold testing, so that's good. My clients seem to like that. I never come to them with an I don't know, typically. So based on that, either I give them a clean bill of health or I write up a protocol for them to use a remediation company to clean clean their house, commercial building, whatever. And but yeah, I was going to tell you, I've had some interesting stories of mold testing. Actually, one of my favorites, I tested an apartment a few years back, and it was a 50-year-old man and his 16-year-old son. The son had been gravely ill. I mean, they couldn't figure out what was going on for months and almost a year. They'd gone all these tests, blood tests, everything. So they eventually had me come in and just do a mold test, and everything looked fine. I took one, and sure enough, in the kitchen, it was like 20,000 spores per cubic meter of Stachybotrys, which was shocking, horrible, huge, it's, terrible levels. And so turns out there was an ice maker line going into the refrigerator that had a pinhole leak in it behind the wall. It was just slowly dripping over time. When they opened it up, it was just a jungle in there, of course, and no one knew. But the son was, so sick, and the 50-year-old man was fine. And it tells you mold is such a fickle thing. I've seen situations where, the healthiest person in the world is sick, and then the sick person doesn't feel anything. Everyone has their own kind of sensitivity, immunity to it. So it's a unique thing to test for. I enjoyed. It's always something new. But the one thing I did want to mention for sure before I get on the next one is mold remediation is something separate from mold testing. I do mold testing, and unfortunately there are companies, mold's not regulated because it's difficult to regulate mold because different regions of the country have different kind of air quality, outdoor air quality, so it's more or less kind of like there's guidelines and so forth, but now for the most part, you separate testing and remediation because it's a major conflict of interest. You think about it, someone could go in and test a house, just fraud the testing and then get bad results and say, oh, it's going to be this much to clean it. So there are companies that do that out there, unfortunately. It's not even technically illegal at the moment, but so I make sure and never do, I only do testing and I only work with companies that only do, remediation. So it keeps it, obviously honest in that way. So particle testing is another thing that I do a lot of. And for mold, the two most common things in an indoor environment that are considered unhealthy would be mold and then any other particle. Basically, there's a test that runs like 45 different...
Just to break in, sorry. When you say any other particle, what kind of other particles might there be present in someone's home in Memphis?
Yeah, the most common are like dander, pollen. I find all kinds of weird things that pop up. There's about a list of about 40 things that that it runs on, and it gives you, if it's nothing there, it'll tell you. If there's a little bit, it'll give you particles per cubic meter of these different things, and you compare that to a, what's considered reasonable range. And sometimes you find like talc, for instance, is on there, ash, fiberglass, insect fragment, all kinds of weird things that can pop up. But a couple of stories I wanted to say that one was interesting. I tested an apartment where a young woman and mother, she had been sick as well, and we did a mold test, nothing popped up. So I suggested a particle test, and sure enough, talc came up like 20 times high, which is odd. I'd never found it before. And so I was like, And I asked the owner, she said, well, they had a leak in this carpeted area and that she was putting powder on it and like vacuuming it all the time because of the smell and whatnot. In this small apartment, the talc levels had built up so high that it was making the child sick.
Oh, wow.
Another one I did, the same as a young man, he was getting sick in his apartment, didn't know what was going on. Did a particle test. Everything was fine except for ash. It was like paraffin ash. There's two kinds. You've got like wood ash and then like kind of a paraffin, like wax ash. And it was through the roof. And I just said, hey, I've never seen this before. That's so odd. And he said, well, I do light a lot of candles. And so apparently he lit candles. And obviously a candle doesn't go away. It gets in the air, these particles. And it had gotten so high that he was being ill from it.
Wow.
So yeah, really, dander is the most commome indoor. I mean, 95%.
You're saying dander, yours meaning?
Yeah, like dead skin cells, basically. We all, animals, animals give off dander, humans give off dander, so it's always high levels I mean, the average probably, that doesn't make sense to you, but like 3,000 particles per cubic meter, it's an average dander count, which sounds like a lot, but it's not that uncommon because, I mean, like I said, you're walking around scratching your ear, skin cells are falling off everywhere, but it's not a hazard. It's more, it could be a respiratory kind of, issue, but not really. But yeah, dander is definitely the most common. Probably 95% of all indoor particles are made up of dander.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. So, and for the particulate, do you do this? Is it the same kind of testing as you do for the mold?
No, it is exactly the same. In fact, yeah, it's the same device. They're basically looking for different things under the microscope.
Okay.
But yeah, no, those are the two most common tests I do by far. I'm going to go over several others that I do from here and there, but radon is another one that's actually kind of become somewhat popular these days. I'm surprised because I never got radon tests asked, for years and years until recently, and it's more common up in the Northeast, just the geography and all that.
So what exactly is radon and why is it in your house?
radon is a naturally occurring element. It's radioactive. It basically comes from rocks in the ground. You know, it's certainly not healthy at high levels, you know, cancer concern and so forth. But basically, yeah, it's more common up north just because of the ground, you know, just the topography, everything else. That in Memphis, you don't typically find it. In fact, I've only found it twice, even just modest levels. But the one time I found it, and it was interesting, was it was a beautiful house, like $1 million house, and they were, you know, just assumed they would get a zero count. You know, with every radon, you know, it's in picocuries per liter. It's the way they measure it, and anything over 4 is considered elevated. And this guy had like a 6, and everything else is usually like 0.1. So I was like, that's weird. And so we did some background check, and he decided not to buy the house, and it turns out it was on an old quarry. And so, you know, a bunch of broken rock underneath the foundation of where the house was sitting, you know, created this radon gas to seep into the house. So weird, you know, it was not surprising, but I thought that was interesting for sure.
What do you do when you've got too much radon in your house?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the remediation method is super simple. You'd think it would be something high tech, but all you do is you put in a kind of a ventilation system low in the house because it's coming from the ground, and you have fans blowing kind of out the house. It's literally, you can just blow the fumes out.
Oh.
It's that simple, yeah.
Oh.
Like for something like, you know, most analytes that, you know, that you remediate are not that simple. But you would think like it would be a lot more complicated for something as, you know, like radon. But yeah, same like radon isn't organic. It's like VOCs I was going to get to next, which are like volatile organic compounds. There's literally 1 million types. I mean, benzene, xylene, toluene, you know, and so on. Those are, you know, what you find in solvents and whatnot. The chemicals that can certainly, again, be carcinogens. Basically, the way you test for those, people they'll have me come to their industrial setting if they've got employees working around a certain chemical. You know, they'll have me put little, like charcoal tubes with a pump, draws air in basically while they're, you know, working in their environment. It's kind of like an OSHA compliance thing. Mm-hmm. And so from there, you know, I get the results. You know, that's a different type of test. You send the charcoal tube in, they analyze it and tell you exactly like how many part per million, so to speak, as a, you know, typical units. And yeah, most times I don't really find that either. The one time I thought was interesting was a man had he bought a new work trailer. You know, it's just a little trailer he hitched to his car and take to jobs, and it was brand new. And it was middle of the summer, and he said every time he would go into his trailer in the morning, you know, before he turned the air on, it was hot, and he said his eyes would burn. You know, it was just driving him crazy. So he eventually called me, went out there and did some just general testing. And sure enough, formaldehyde popped up just absolutely through the roof. It turns out it's a common preservative in woods, like new cabinetry and so forth. So he didn't, you know, the temperature in the room was getting in the 130 range, you know, in the middle of the day if he wasn't in there, and it was off-gassing. And so, I mean, you could smell it right away. I mean, it would burn your eyes. I mean, you know, formaldehyde is nasty for sure, and you feel it right away. So it's one of those things, yeah, that you don't play with, but yeah, he ended up getting a full refund on it, I think, at the end of the day. But yeah, no, I used to do a lot of printing press facilities where, you know, same thing, you know, you've got ink, you've got live ink with, you know, that's just being printed with, you know, you've got all kinds of, you know, emissions coming off of that. So, you know, there's a lot to have to do to make sure that they're in compliance with OSHA and so forth. So, yeah, VOCs is another one. Lead paint, a big one we get requests for, mainly in older houses, of course. The thing about lead paint is, you know, usually kids are the biggest concern because for whatever reason, you know, if a lead paint chip actually has a sweet flavor to it, strangely enough. So these old houses, these kids can find, you know, and it tastes good to them. So there's been all kinds of stories about lead poisoning that way. And so a lot of cases, people want to buy a house in Midtown or downtown. They'll have me come out and do just a cursory lead test around the premises, and you know, don't really find it too much. And if I do, it's usually low levels. But the good thing about that, even if you find lead, it's not really an issue unless you have to like grind, cut, sand, you know, as long as you're not disturbing the paint, it's really not a problem. It's kind of, it's basically concealed in you know, behind everything. If you're grinding, cutting, sawing, anything like that, that's when you can get it airborne and it could be an issue. Okay. But yeah, asbestos is probably, you know, our second, next to me, my partner, he's our certified asbestos inspector, but he's the one that handles, like, we get a lot of those. I mean, commercial, residential, and you can only imagine. There's, you know, a lot of people, if they have popcorn ceiling and, in their house, and they want to, scrape it, or they want to test it first, or they want to scrape the ceiling, make sure there's no asbestos in it, because, that certainly was the case years back. It was in popcorn ceiling. Also, like certain tiles, old tiles, 9x9s in particular, are known, typically have asbestos. Old pipe insulation on boilers, usually, now it's all fiberglass and whatnot, but back, it was all asbestos back then. So when you find it, again, it's a lot like lead. If it's in place and it's not disturbed, or it doesn't get friable, as they say, then it's not necessarily harming anybody. But if you have to get it removed, which in a lot of cases you do, then that's a lot more sensitive, because you have guys, again, remediation companies. We just do the testing. We don't do the cleanup from asbestos either. But they, they're full PPE, like scuba gear, everything's, they're in there just breaking this up, because you don't know what you're releasing while you're doing this. And then, of course, when they're finished, they'll put air scrubbers, HEPA filters in there to get all the residual, asbestos fibers out of the air. So that's a big part of what we do. A lot of asbestos. Water is another thing we do a lot of, water testing, especially for like drinking water. People have wells out, kind of outside the city. They want to test their water for certain things like metals and, organics, chlorines, just different things, solids. Because, from a water well, it's not regulated like it would be from, MLGW, of course. Gotcha. And also we do, not just residential, but monitoring wells. If there's been a site that's had some kind of spill or some kind of damage with, soil damage, and they put monitoring wells in to test the groundwater, we do sampling there, where we actually, get balers and pull water out and bottle, just take it to the lab and send it in for whatever, if they had like an underground storage tank with gasoline, you test for hydrocarbons or gasoline or what have you, whatever the pollutant is in this case. But yeah, water's good. Another big one. Bacterial is big for us. Like we do, like histoplasmosis. You probably heard. That's basically pigeon droppings. I've had so many jobs where people that think that they get online and they think they have these these diseases and whatnot, and I'm happy to do the testing for them, but never found it. I get a lot of requests. Same with Legionella. A lot of companies will have me test their water for Legionnaire's disease, Legionella. Never really found anything there either, thank goodness. But yeah, that's a lot of the same requests we get for water. Same with soil. Some people even want to test their soil at their home for nutrients for if they want to do gardening. Anything like that. Yeah. So there's a million different kind of scenarios. It's always new. Every day I get a new call. I get an interesting request, and so it's never dull.
So it's not all bad news that people are looking for. They're looking for good news as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, a lot of times, they think they have bad news, but I give them good news. It's just the best way to do it. So yeah. And then one more thing I did want to say, we do environmental site assessments, which it's not testing, but it's called a phase one. Basically, when banks want to loan money on a property, they do their due diligence and have us come out and do an environmental audit. Mm-hmm. And what that means is, we look up the whole history of the property. If there's an old gas station there or whatever, and you can do underground storage tank checks and just see what was ever there. And if you find something that looks, particularly, scary, then you can do what's called a phase two, which is testing the area. But basically, the banks use us to feel comfortable they're not going to have a problem later with a dirty piece of land. So my partner, again, he does all. We do a lot of those for banks as well. So that's a very common type of testing, or a type of project for us.
So there's some research towards the history of the site first, and then using that to influence how it is you're going to test going forward.
Yeah, and we have these coal directories, which are neat. It's like historical background, like the history of the city, so you can look up old addresses, see what was there in 1910, or if it was a business, if it was a person, whatever. And so you're also looking up, these government agencies that have the history of, like I said, any kind of work, or any kind of, if there was like some kind of problem there in the past, that's going to show up on the records as well. So you're just making sure that they're not buying a lemon of land, basically. Yeah.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Just a reminder, you can do a lot of historical research at the Memphis Public Libraries. So your typical clients, are you working, is it mostly then with individuals and houses across the area, or is it businesses?
I would say probably 50% of my clients are just straight residential, local. Mm-hmm. I'll get out into Arkansas, Mississippi a little bit, but it's always your kind of like mold, particle, asbestos, just a lot of people are just concerned, their family safety and whatnot, I get it. But then, I'd say a quarter of it is industrial, like where I say I do OSHA compliance, noise studies, we do a lot of those, for if someone's working around heavy machinery, you can put a dosimeter on them and, monitor them for 8 hours. Basically, it does a data logging of all the decibel levels. And so when you get that, if the average, decibel level is over like 90 dBA, I believe it is, then that would be, you would have to go into, kind of conservation program where you, earplugs, things like that. And if it gets, they have to protect their worker safety, of course. And then do a lot of, like I said, solvent testing, particle testing. Some places where they do cutting and sawing, they've got like just tons of airborne particles. Could be anything. It could be stone. It could be wood. It could, all kinds of different things, paper. But, again, OSHA has all kinds of compliance numbers for whatever analyte there is. They've got a limit that you can't exceed. So they're making sure the companies are doing their due diligence with me by having me make sure that they're, under these levels and that their workers are safe. And then, let's see, what was the other thing you said? Lost my train of thought there.
That's okay. So can you walk us through a typical project then from start to finish? So
sure.
How does it work?
Yeah, common, like for me, I do all of ServPro's testing. They're, again, only do remediation. I do testing. I'm their kind of third-party tester. So I'll come in, I'll get a call from ServPro and they'll say, hey, we need you to go to this place, take a look. We know they had some water damage. We went there, saw a little bit of possible mold. Whenever they run into something that looks like mold, they call me to go do what's called a baseline test. And like I explained earlier, I'll go in there, swab, take some air samples, get some pictures, just kind of assess the property, get the results back, and then if it's clean, it's clean. If it's not, I write up like I said, a full protocol, give it to ServPro. They go in and do their thing. Once they're finished, they'll call me and have me come back and do what's called a clearance test. And so usually they always clear, 99, especially ServPro does, but sometimes I've worked with other companies where if it doesn't quite clear, most companies, they have a guarantee where if it doesn't, they'll go back and keep working on it until it does. And when I say working on it, a typical remediation is like basically material removal, of course. You're using things like fogging agents, antimicrobial fungicides that you're applying. You're using high efficiency air scrubbers. Basically, like I said, once they do all their removal of everything and got everything cleaned and wiped down, they'll put these giant like 3,000 CFM air scrubbers and let them just run for like 48 hours. And so it basically just pulls all the loose spores out of the air. And then, so I'll come back and test, and like I said, 99 times out of 100 comes back clean. And so that would be a project from start to finish.
Excellent. All right. So how does your work impact the Memphis community and the surrounding region? At the end of the day, what is it that you've done that's making Memphis a better place?
Well, yeah, it's more of an individual, I think, thing, because I deal with so many individuals on a weekly basis. I might have 10 jobs a week, and it's 10 different residences. So I can't say I've got this overarching impact on the city, but I definitely have an impact on a lot of people and, small companies. I do, like I said, a lot of these businesses use me all the time for compliance or for just testing or whatever. And so I'm helping them keep their business, in good shape. I'm helping families hopefully keep their house safe and know what's going on, with their kids, because a lot of times it's just concern for their children and whatnot. But I like to think, I like the one-on-one. I'm good at kind of one-on-one experience. I'm not necessarily like a group. I don't do a lot of government stuff. I just do individual and small companies, and it works for me. We're a small company, and it seems to work.
Okay, excellent.
Oh, but I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah.
I did forget to get to a compliance part that we do.
Indeed.
The testing is what I went over earlier. The compliance is a little different. That's where we work with, like Title V is an EPA. It's when large companies, industries emit air pollution that's to a certain level, they have to get a Title V permit, which is an EPA permit, which basically calculates all their emissions. If they're over 100 tons per year of any single pollutant, they qualify for that. And there's 5 priority pollutants. So you've got sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, VOCs, and particulate matter. So if any one of those 5 is over 100 tons a year, they qualify for Title V, which is pretty burdensome. And it requires a lot of monitoring, a lot of reporting, a lot of stack testing, which is not cheap either. These companies get these giant machines on these roofs and do stack testing and in order to stay in compliance. And so that's a big one that we do a lot of air compliance stuff for bigger companies. These are companies obviously that are in industrial settings and making whatever, but also the Title V, the OSHA compliance is the second biggest thing, and that's basically what I went over before. A lot of noise studies, a lot of like individual individual workers' safety, where I'm putting on what have you. I mean, I've tested for 1,000 different things. It depends on, again, what the company itself produces or uses as to what we test for, and make sure that they're all safe.
When you're doing this compliance testing with these large companies, how far away are you testing? Are you testing just on their site? Are you testing further out into the neighborhood?
Oh, no. Most jobs are site. They're very localized. Yeah. I mean, definitely and for mold. I mean, like I said, I test in the building or the residence, and then you do one outside so technically there's one outside the house as a background. You're doing your comparison purposes. But all in all, no, it's all inside. I've done some odd jobs. One that was interesting. I had a guy. It was I think it's one of these AI machine, or one of these companies that moved into his property or behind his property that was making a lot of noise. And it was probably 500 feet from his property, but he said he can hear it at night. It was driving him crazy, and it was affecting his sleep. So I went and got I had some dosimeters, and I put one in his room and then one on his property line, just to see what the decibel levels were. And sure enough, it was violating like the noise ordinance standards. So this guy was able to kind of take the data that I'd given him to fight this company. I mean, it's just a big process. I don't know what they're doing. It's just computers. It's a bunch of noise. It sounds like it's like a bunch of refrigeration machines that are just humming. Okay. So yeah, so he just couldn't take it anymore, and I think he's actually making some headway on legally having it moved.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Excellent. How is ECT evolving? Like, are there new technologies that are coming out that you're excited to use as a?
Yeah, no. We try to stay on top of that. Yeah. One device we got recently that's been really helpful. It's an infrared camera, like a FLIR camera that basically you can see inside it. It measures temperature changes inside wall cavities. So it would basically show you if there's a pocket of moisture. So sometimes the hardest thing with mold is sometimes to identify where it is. I can go in and test and get these high levels, but if I can't tell you where to find it, that can be a problem. Obviously, you don't want to tear the whole house apart. So what this does, you can take it around, just shine it on, walls, and it's got a screen on it. It'll just, it'll show color changes as to where moisture would be. And it's incredibly helpful as far as finding something you can't see. We do wall cavity tests where you can, drill a hole and test inside a wall cavity, but this actually lets you see. Now, you don't see mold, you just see, the potential for mold. But yeah, we try to stay on top. We've got, our labs we use, we're always making sure that they're qualified, certified, American Industrial Hygiene Association. We don't cut corners or anything. Everything that we test with, all of our devices are, state of the art for sure.
Mike from Environmental Compliance and Testing, thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, Mark, pleasure. Nice
Have a good one.
You too, thank you.
Watching the Library Channel, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Libraries and the City of Memphis.